On January 18th, 2026, something went terribly wrong on Spain's high-speed rail network, a system that's supposed to be a symbol of safety and modernity. We're going to do a deep dive into the Adamuz Rail disaster. It's really an anatomy of how a system and all the trust we put in it can just completely break down.
You know, for the people who were actually on those trains, it wasn't a crash in the way you might picture it. For those who made it through, the feeling was just primal, totally out of control. In their own words, it felt like the entire world was just giving way beneath them. And when all the shaking finally stopped, when the twisted metal settled, this was the cost. 41 people, 41 lives lost. That number, that's the human tragedy at the very heart of what we're talking about today. So, to really get our heads around what happened, we're going to walk through 5 parts. We'll start with the crash itself, the earthquake. Then we'll look at the physical cause, what actually broke. After that, we uncover the warnings that were missed, feel the human impact. And finally, we'll see why the entire system is now on trial. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in the south of Spain, near Córdoba, on one of the busiest high-speed lines in the whole country. It's dark, and you've got 2 trains approaching each other. One is run by a private company, Iryo, and the other by the state operator, Renfe. The whole thing starts almost silently. The Iryo train has some kind of structural failure, and its back carriages just jump the tracks. But they don't just stop, they swing out violently, right into the path of the train on the other track. And less than 20 seconds later, the Renfe train, doing over 200 kilometers an hour, just slams right into it. There was 0 time to react, no time to even hit the brake. So the big question for investigators was, how? How does a modern train just derail on a perfectly straight piece of track? Well, the answer wasn't in the train itself, and it wasn't the driver's fault. It was in the steel running underneath the wheels. And this is it. This is the component at the center of everything, a fishplate. The easiest way to think about it is like a stitch that holds 2 huge pieces of steel rail together. Now, most high-speed tracks are all welded into one continuous piece, but you still need these joints for things like signaling or repairs. They are absolutely critical. And in this case, one of them failed. And this just lays out the chain reaction perfectly. It all starts with a worn-out joint, just a small gap. Then the front of that Iryo's train passes over it, and the huge weight and force just rips that gap wide open. The rear carriages hit this broken section, they've got nothing to guide them, and they jump the track. They swing out, and in the 20 seconds it takes for the other train to show up, a simple broken part becomes a scene of absolute devastation. Look, a broken piece of metal is a technical failure, right? But the evidence that started coming out after the crash, well, it suggests something way more disturbing. This wasn't just a technical problem, it was a human one. And the worst part is, this tragedy might have been preventable. Now, this timeline, this is where it gets really incredible. Check this out. In May of 2025, the rail administrator, ADF, proudly announces that this exact section of track has been completely renovated. But then, just 3 months later, the train drivers' union sends a formal written warning saying, hey, this section is dangerous. 5 months after that, the crash happens. The disconnect is just staggering. And we're not talking about some vague complaint here. The drivers were incredibly specific. They were reporting batches, basically potholes in the track, that were causing violent shaking. They reported severe side-to-side vibrations. They even reported a specific incident where a crew member got hurt because the ride was so rough it shook equipment loose. These were documented, specific warnings that the track was dangerously unstable. So, behind all the technical analysis, behind the questions of accountability, there are the people. The 41 who died, the hundreds who were injured, and all the families whose lives were just shattered in a single moment. The driver of the Renfe train was a young man named Pablo B. He was just 27 years old. He'd actually graduated with a degree in computer engineering, but followed his passion to become a high-speed train operator. He was at the front of that train with absolutely no warning when it hit the wreckage. He was killed instantly. The crash also just wiped out entire families. One family from a town called Puente Umbria lost 4 members, a father, a mother, their son, and a nephew. It's almost unbelievable, but a 6-year-old girl from that same family was pulled from the wreckage alive. She survived, but she's now an orphan. It's hard to even imagine the terror inside those carriages. One survivor, Rocio Flores, was thrown from her seat by the impact. She was so sure she was dying that her first instinct was to call her parents, just to say goodbye one last time. The fact that she made it while people sitting right near her didn't is a weight she now has to carry. You see, this disaster is so much bigger than just one broken fish plate. It really puts the entire system of maintenance, of oversight, of accountability for Spain's famous rail network, it puts the whole thing on trial.
And to really get why, let's compare Adamuz to Spain's last huge rail disaster, Angrois, back in 2013. In that case, the cause was clear: human error. A driver was going way too fast, and the political focus was all on his negligence. But Adamuz is different, and you could argue it's much more alarming. Here, the cause was infrastructure failure. It happened after explicit formal warnings were sent. And so the focus now isn't on the driver, it's on maintenance and corporate negligence. That suggests the problem isn't with one person, but with the whole system.
And you can see this shift in the legal reality of the situation. The investigation isn't even looking at the drivers. They were doing their jobs perfectly. It's focused squarely on the officials at ADIF who got those warnings and on the contractors who were responsible for a renovation that apparently failed in just a few months. Accountability is moving up the chain of command. When you boil it all down, the Adamuz disaster started with a broken piece of steel, sure. But the real failure was a broken system of trust. Trust between the people who operate the trains every day and the people who are supposed to guarantee their safety. And that leaves all of us with a really chilling final question. How many other warnings are being ignored on the tracks we travel on every single day?